Hello. How are you? I'm doing well. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you to Girl Up for having us.
So honored to get to meet you in person. I've been a huge fan of all the incredible things that you do to advance gender equity and representation. And I'm so grateful to be here on behalf of Girl Up, which has been an organization that's provided me with so many opportunities to really raise my voice and be heard. And I'm so grateful to be having this conversation with you today.
Same. Thank you.
So just to start off, as mentioned, you've been involved in law and also entrepreneurship and business. So as someone who was previously working in law, what inspired you to start your business, Phenomenal, and what sparked that switch?
So it's sort of a long, winding, and unexpected journey for me becoming a corporate lawyer to an entrepreneur and a business owner. So I'll spare some of the details of that and try to focus on the theme today, which is around change makers, right, and living our purpose. And quickly, in terms of becoming a lawyer, I grew up in a family of public interest lawyers and public servants, and they were role models for me in showing the power of the law in creating change and fighting for our communities and fighting oppression. And so it's probably no surprise that I went to law school. And while I was practicing law, I quickly realized that it was not for me. And I really, I've always been creative. I've always been entrepreneurial. As a kid, I loved to draw and paint. And it took a while to sort of realize, maybe I'm a little different than my family. And, what they do is really important, but, maybe I have a different path. And at the same time, I was also raised to understand my responsibility to make an impact, no matter how big or how small, from wherever I was, and with whatever sphere I was in, to exercise some sort of influence to make positive change. And so I really struggled for a while, even being back in New York, with all these young, inspiring folks. I really struggled as a young lawyer, wondering if I was going to continue practicing here in New York City, and I couldn't do it. But I wanted, to find something that I felt like I enjoyed, but also would allow me to live out that purpose and make an impact. And I kind of did some things on the side and found ways to fill that up, but it really ultimately was the 2016 election that ended up, I think, for a lot of people, being a catalyst to make that leap. And it was still sort of unexpected. It started off as a very small idea, which was a single T-shirt and a 1-month-long campaign to raise money for women's and girl organizations like Girl Up. And 1 month became 3 months, became 6 months, became almost 5 years. Here we are today and are now building a media and entertainment company that still carries forward that mission and purpose of centering women and underrepresented communities. So, I think to me the lesson is that all of us have a role to play, no matter how small, and no one can do everything, but everyone can do something, whether it's your full-time job or something that you're doing on the side. Each of us can contribute in our own way, and so. Some people, that's going to law school, maybe it's running for office. For me, it started off as like a little T-shirt, and it's been really fun. So I'm really just excited to be here with all of you, and it's also an opportunity to get to meet other incredible women like yourself.
Thank you so much, and I agree. I think the biggest takeaway that I have from my time with Girl Up is that there isn't one way to be a leader, that whatever your contribution is, whatever form that takes, it can be incredibly powerful and sparking change. And I love how your journey has just always had gender equality at the heart, but it's had so many aspects to it.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I'm excited to hear about your journey. So you are involved in policy making, and the policy making aspect of advocacy, specifically around renewable energy. And something that I think about a lot is the next generation and how important, obviously, youth and young people are to policy making and making sure that we have lasting change that not only impacts my life and my children's life, but yours and so on. How have you made your voice heard? How did you get into renewable energy? And what is your advice? What is your advice for my 4- and 6-year-olds who are also interested in climate and energy?
First of all, that's amazing. There's this one quote by Malala that mentions that one child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world. And that was very much the case for me. As I was starting out high school, I took a marine biology class. And one of our challenges for our midterm was to find an issue that we cared about related to the ocean or sustainability, and to create a project that was related to not only presenting that issue, but finding solutions. and I chose the issue of plastic pollution. And then my teacher encouraged me to take a look at legislation that was being presented in the State House in New Hampshire, where I'm from, and to identify any that seemed relevant to my project and actually apply what I learned, because all those solutions were just sitting in a PowerPoint that I presented in front of my class. And it was that encouragement from my teacher that sparked my passion for legislative advocacy, because I then found legislation related to plastic pollution, and I remember talking to my mom and asking her, what am I getting myself into, as I pulled together my testimony and I got to the State House. But it sparked a journey that I'm really grateful for, because when I walked into that room, I saw that every single person sitting at that table, every legislator, was a man and was older. And it was a very daunting atmosphere, and I definitely felt very much out of place, like I didn't belong, especially as one of the only young people, especially a young woman. But after I spoke, I realized that if I hadn't, that perspective would have been completely absent from the policy-making conversation. And it was actually my generation, and especially girls, who are like the most impacted by the policies that are being talked about, especially as it relates to climate action. And so I'm grateful for Girl Up, because it's allowed me to get involved in advocacy for climate policy, but also gender equality, at not only the local level, but federally and at the UN level. And I think my advice would be also very similar to what you were saying, that whether you are contributing in a way that's traditionally associated with activism, like speaking up for legislation, or whether you're researching or writing, whatever contribution you have is incredibly important. And I definitely look for local legislation, look for policies that align with your interests, but if they don't exist, feel free to reach out and make it happen, because I've been so grateful to work with representatives and actually create the legislation that I did.
I love that, and something that's really important that I'm hearing too is that you had not only access to this class that inspired you, and you had a teacher that encouraged you to continue with that, right? And so there's so many folks in our communities that are also so essential to this, so that's really inspiring.
Girls' education.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
When writing your children's books, which also are really incredibly inspiring and focus on educating the next generation, you've mentioned that you prioritize creating characters of color and characters that will represent the variety of girls who read them. And how did the lack of representation affect you when you were growing up? How were you inspired to kind of fill that void that you saw in media?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of talked about this a little bit already, which is that I now, as an adult, especially as a parent, realize what a unique home I grew up in. And my honest answer is that I didn't really appreciate the sort of societal lack of representation until I got into the real world, because I joke that growing up in my house was sort of like the opening scene of the Wonder Woman movie. It's just like all these strong women like running around, helping each other. It was just like a family of women. That's all I knew. And I joke that the idea of men in power, like, I didn't know what that was. Not until, I went off to college and really kind of, started getting into the real world. And it was really actually becoming a parent that inspired me to write kids' books, and in part being influenced by seeing the lack of representation and diversity in children's books. I was a new mom and was reading to my now older daughter, and all the classics, Goodnight Moon and Brown Bear and all these lovely books, and started to wonder where the little black girl characters were that looked like my daughter, and they just weren't there. This is now a study that was done in 2018, and we've made a ton of progress since then, but I'll share that the study found that there are, or were at that time, more children's books that had main characters that were animals than children's books that had human characters that were Black, Latinx, Asian, and Hispanic, or I already said Hispanic, Black, underrepresented communities combined, BIPOC communities combined, meaning there were more books that had animals as main characters than actual people of color, right? And as a parent, we would sometimes go grab a brown marker and color in the skin of the character. We were changing the pronouns from he to she to they, right? And it was just really seeing the power of literature and children's literature, and understanding that, again, I grew up in a really unique way, but books and family, right, are some of the earliest ways that children start to see the world and start to, or not see themselves represented in the world. So that was really what was a huge inspiration to me in writing kids' books. And it's something that I thought would be kind of similar to my story. Like I thought it was going to be a one-off kind of side fun thing really for my family, for my daughters. And it turns out it's kind of fun. And there's still a lot more work to do. We've made a ton of progress just in the last 3 to 5 years, I would say, since that study in 2018. I'm very proud to be among sort of a new next generation of many authors and illustrators of color. But the industry, to your point about what legislators often look like, it's still very old and white. And from authors to illustrators, and there's a lot more to do. And so I'm writing more books, which is really fun.
That's amazing. I've been reading them as well, and they are inspirational, I think, no matter what your age is, because the messages in them resonate so much. And definitely as someone who was raised on books, it's so powerful because it really shapes the way you grow up and the way you see yourself in the world.
Exactly. And every child should have that opportunity, every girl, every young person, and not have the privilege, frankly, of growing up in such a unique way, right? Where they're sort of just around you all the time, but to be able to access tools and for parents to have those tools to raise the next generation. So, going back to climate action, what you're really passionate about, you talked about your class, you talked about your teacher and the first experience of advocating before a legislature, but what was it that really inspired you to advocate for climate around gender? Right, we know that climate is an intersectional issue that touches on race and gender and all these other inequities that our communities experience, but how did you get into it from that angle?
Yes, well, I think also on the topic of representation, when looking at the way that climate is portrayed in the media and by politicians, it has a very limited sort of narrative that's almost dehumanized. So if you look at reports about climate, they'll have graphs with temperature data or pictures of melting ice caps. And when you look at climate solutions, they often talk a lot about solar panels or composting or abstract future technologies. But I think although those are very important aspects of the climate crisis, there's so many people who are being affected. And the human aspect of the climate crisis is what has really resonated with me and inspired me to take action. And then I think when you envision a climate activist, there is that chance that you will think of a young woman, because young women have really been at the forefront of the climate movement, from Greta Thunberg to Shia Bastida and Vanessa Nakate. And then when I organize climate strikes and protests in my community, I look out and see that it would just be a sea of young women's faces, all of them bringing and uniting their communities. And so to see that sort of disconnect between the way that the climate crisis is portrayed, but what was actually happening on the ground, was very jarring to me. And it motivated me to look for that connection between gender and climate. And it's very much there. 12 million girls each year are expected to be out of school and unable to complete their education because of the effects of the climate crisis. And then a study by the Malala Fund found that if every girl worldwide had access to 12 years of quality education and reproductive health care, that would actually be 4 times as effective as switching to solar power in terms of emissions reduced. So I think it's essential that we combine gender and climate and act on them together. And I'm really grateful for Girl Up because it's allowed me to bring together those intersectional perspectives.
Was there a specific event that happened that really sort of catalyzed this for you?
I think definitely organizing climate strikes and just seeing the audience and seeing how many girls there were there who were so passionate about it. And of course, seeing that not reflected in the legislators, in the policies, because I would look at how gender and climate were treated as very, very separate, but I think that it's powerful to act on them together.
Right. When you think of, legislators, they're representatives. They literally, their job is to represent, exactly. Right? Whether or not you literally look like or have the experience of your constituents, but that often when you don't have that experience, right, those experiences are not considered, and they're therefore left out. So, yeah.
You've always been integrating gender into your work, whether it was as a lawyer or a businesswoman or an entrepreneur or a writer. What has allowed you and inspired you to keep advocating for gender justice? And do you have any advice for people who are hoping to integrate that into their future career?
Yeah, I think I would build on what we talked about earlier, right? Just wherever you are, no matter how small or big, think about what kind of impact you can make from your own sphere of influence with your own unique skills. I would say that, you know, in terms of my continuing to do the work, I think about what Nigel said, and that often, you know, this is hard work. It can feel overwhelming and defeating often. It often can feel like two steps forward, one step back, right? And you got to stick with it. And for me, it is, you know, understanding that there's more work to do. It is, as we talked about, becoming a parent and knowing that the work that I'm doing, that you're doing, is going to impact the world that my girls grow up in and that the next generation grows up in. That is, you know, not just about will they have a better shot or a more level playing field, but also, are they going to be breathing quality air? Are they going to, right? Are they going to experience unprecedented weather events? I mean, like, this stuff is here and it's now. And as a now older person, I really, you know, think about all of these incredible women, right? Many of whom are in this room today from Detroit. You know, you mentioned climate activists. I'm thinking about Miss Flint, from, you know, Flint to Delhi to Tehran, right? And in terms of what we're seeing right now, standing up and speaking out, and many of them risking their lives, right? And Girl Up is a global organization, and I think it's important to also note that all of this is connected, right? What we are seeing in Tehran is connected to what we are seeing here in the United States, which is an unprecedented healthcare crisis and attack on women's bodily autonomy, right? And you know, wanting to prevent women from accessing abortion care. It's the same as wanting to force women to, you know, change their appearance, or right? It's the same stuff that is about control and power imbalance, and it takes bravery, it takes courage, and we're seeing that, right? Right now. And that inspires me. It's hard. You know, you said this, Nigel, right? I mean, it's inspiring. It's also like, how in the year of our Lord 2022 is this still happening, and we're still just making these sort of seemingly small steps forward, right? When there's so much at stake. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it?
Well, thank you so much. It was so wonderful and inspiring to speak to you, and I just think that message of representation, but also the interconnectedness of our world and all of these issues is so much at the heart of what Girl Up does, and it's been so wonderful to hear your perspective. And I definitely look forward to continuing to advocate for that in the future. And once again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for all you do. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.